Hello again. Next reading is from Hope and Resiliency by Dan Short, Betty Alice Erickson, which is Erickson's wife again, and his daughter Roxanne. I'll read from a little bit from chapter 5 and chapter 6. This is more philosophy and of his work and core strategies. I feel like it's his students mostly who put framework and strategic language around his work. He seemed much more fluid in his approach with people, taking things in at the moment, observing, responding from what his intuition gave him. So he developed that in bed as a 19-year-old with polio and had several other what they referred to as disabilities, dyslexia as well. So let me read an example of his philosophical framework, and then I'll read maybe the whole short chapter of his core strategies. Chapter 5, a philosophical framework. This chapter makes use of philosophical terms that did not come from Erickson's writing or lectures, but that provide a philanthropic background for understanding his clinical construction of hope. Clinical construction of hope. An important question to be answered in this chapter is, how can patients turn to someone outside of themselves for help and yet retain the integrity of their personal will? While striving to avoid the use of unnecessary jargon, the terms used in this chapter are meant to act as coordinates to help locate Erickson's position in relation to other celebrated thinkers. Case report, the woman with Raynaud's disease. And Raynaud's disease, I had to look it up. It manifests in the experience of having cold and numb areas of the body. A 50-year-old woman diagnosed with Raynaud's disease came into Erickson's office in a state of extreme pain and sleep deprivation. She showed her hands to Erickson and said, "I have got ulcerated fingers from lack of circulation in my hands. I have already had one finger amputated and now expect to have another amputation." She described her pain as being so intense that she could only sleep for 1 to 2 hours at a time. Erickson responded by saying that he did not know much about treating Raynaud's disease. He told her that if there were anything that could be done about this, her own body learnings would take care of the matter. He taught her how to go into a trance, during which he explained she had a tremendous amount of body learning, the visceral abilities that we all accumulate over a lifetime of experience. He suggested that during the day, her unconscious mind be completely absorbed in correlating all of her body learnings to use for her benefit. Before going to bed, she was to sit in a chair and develop a trance state, and during that trance, she was to put all of her learnings into action. After coming out of the trance, she was to call Erickson. The woman followed Erickson's prescribed routine. Before bedtime, she went into a trance. She called Erickson at 10:30 p.m. and in a trembling voice said, "My husband is holding the phone because I am too weak to hold the receiver. I'm scared. I can scarcely sit in the chair. I did exactly what you said. I sat in the chair and went into a trance, and then all of a sudden I started to get cold. I got colder and colder, just like when I was a little girl in Minnesota. I shrived all over for about 20 minutes. My teeth were chattered. Then all of a sudden the cold disappeared and I began to get warm. I felt burning hot all over. Now I have developed a profound sense of physical relaxation and fatigue." Erickson responded by saying, "Congratulations for teaching me how to handle this sort of problem. Now go to bed and call me when you wake up." Erickson received the next call at 8 a.m. It was her first continuous night's sleep in over 10 years. Erickson explained this success by saying, I did not do anything other than to tell her to utilize in her own way her own special body learnings. Several months later, he received a letter telling him that she had remained free of pain by using this method of capillary dilation in her arms, wrists, and hands. Each night before she went to bed, she would alter the circulation of her blood so that she was able to achieve comfort in her hands and was therefore able to sleep through the night. The wisdom of body learnings. It's Erickson in the 1960s. One paragraph after that story. A fundamental characteristic underlying all of Erickson's teaching and therapy is his deep respect for the individuality of each person. During his clinical work, he was careful to create therapeutic space for patients to accomplish their objectives in their own way. Erickson did not believe patients should be made to conform to other people's theoretical models of change. He believed that the philosophy of change must come from the patient and not from the textbook. Next, Chapter 6, Introduction to Core Strategies. Maybe Erickson had some part in naming some of these approaches. He doesn't seem to in his fluid approach, like I said, but it can be helpful to use mental storage of understanding. The real effectiveness to me comes in the actual experiential aspect of healing. Distraction. Unintentional progress impedes self-sabotage. Unintentional progress impedes self-sabotage. That's distraction. Secondly, partitioning. When everything cannot be made right, it is good to have something that is rectified. So they partitioned off the whole picture from the thing that could be rectified. Progression. It is not possible to cure every sickness, but there is always some good that can be done for those who suffer. I call it incremental approximation. Suggestion. All problem solving begins with the idea that change is possible. If we don't believe change is possible, then our body will go with our belief, if it's a convicted belief. Reorientation. The greater the complexity of a person's psychological problem, the greater opportunity to discover a simple solution. Reorientation. The greater the complexity of a person's psychological problem, the greater the opportunity to discover a simple solution. Utilization. Whenever you try to make a person change, you encourage animosity. But if you offer an opportunity, your energy is not wasted. These 6 statements reflect some of the most important lessons taught by Milton Erickson. These axioms briefly illustrate the functional definition of everything that is to follow in the coming text. Although the wording is from Dan Short, the ideas are drawn from one of the most legendary figures in the field of psychiatry and psychology. The master of a craft, one who is exceedingly accomplished at complex tasks, has the ability to apply robust strategies in order to quickly solve problems. Once a skill has become practiced to the point of automaticity, it requires less and less conscious deliberation and is more likely to occur as a spontaneous response. So it's not second nature, it's more like first nature. So efficiency is greatly increased as each conscious decision represents numerous chains of implicit reasoning. This is one reason veteran clinicians often have difficulty articulating the clinical strategies they employ. Their responses have become so practiced that to deliberate to deliberate consciously on each step would only cause them to falter. Within the context of psychotherapeutics, what has commonly been referred to as clinical intuition is more accurately understood as implicit reason. Implicit reason. There's a subtle nature to that word, implicit reason. This distinguishes it as a logical process that is distinctly different from creative guessing or luck. Individuals seeking to acquire problem-solving skills, such as Erickson had, benefit from having the enigmatic strategies of a genius made clear. Part 2 of this book has been designed to elaborate on several of Erickson's strategies for clinical problem-solving. As with a skeleton key, each strategy can be applied to a variety of problem situations in order to arrive at a new and unique solution. What will become apparent is that the broader the application of a particular strategy, the more uses that can be made of it. A clinical strategy is simply defined as a fundamental principle of human problem solving. A clinical strategy is simply defined as a fundamental principle of human problem solving. Clinical strategies allow expert clinicians to design specialized techniques to address a wide variety of emotional and psychological challenges. In order to know the difference between a technique and a strategy, it should be recognized that distinct psychotherapeutic techniques such as double bind, symptom prescription, and paradoxical directive can be grouped into, and those are fun too, can be grouped into categories that illustrate some common function. It is this functional understanding of technique that allows the practitioner to operate in a strategic fashion. This is one reason why it is so important to develop an understanding of the strategies that govern a class of techniques. When a practitioner blindly applies a therapeutic technique without fully understanding the clinical function, resourcefulness is impeded and success becomes random. An understanding of clinical strategies fosters less dependency on predetermined procedures. Understanding of these strategies fosters less dependency on predetermined procedures. In other words, you can't just follow the textbook and be fluid and living and appropriately interacting with another human being. My words, obviously. Although clinical judgment has been almost universally accepted as an essential factor in psychotherapeutics, very few therapies provide a means of teaching it. While describing the problem of automated responses in therapy, in therapeutic approaches, one must always take into consideration the actual personality of the individual. Are they over-friendly, hostile, defiant, extroverted, introverted? The therapist must be fairly fluid in his behavior, because if he is rigid, he is going to elicit certain types of rigid behavior in the patient. This is not a text about therapeutic techniques. There are no rigid step-by-step formulae to be memorized and applied in each therapy session. The goal of this book is much more ambitious. In the way that Erickson was able to design a new technique for almost every new case, the following clinical strategies provide a basis for fluid clinical judgment. Although each chapter contains a series of techniques used by Erickson and others, these behavioral protocols are not to be blindly mimicked. Each therapy situation requires sufficient clinical judgment to design or modify techniques in order to meet a multitude of unique clinical variables. Within the context of healing, powerful and sophisticated psychotherapeutics rarely involve a single clinical strategy. It's instead a skillful combination of procedures that together promote the idea that change is possible. While it seems obvious that effective therapies must offer more than one technique, not much consideration has been given to the number of strategies afforded by each school of therapy. It is difficult to find another single approach to psychotherapy that incorporates as many strategies for healing as the Ericksonian approach. There are at least 6 strategic positions that emerge from Erickson's work. These are the ones that we read at the beginning: distraction, partitioning, progression, suggestion, reorientation, and utilization. These strategies are by no means mutually exclusive. They can be thought of as primary colors. Each can be arranged and mixed with others in order to create a wide-ranging yet highly precise response to a given problem. A very nice example of this can be seen in some creative problem solving by Erickson for 2 of his children. At the time, Roxana Erickson Klein, one of the authors of this text, was only 5 years old, and she had been injured by her big brother, Lance. He accidentally caught her foot in the bottom of a door, tearing the nail from her big toe. Roxana was hurt not only by the physical injury, but also by the fact that her brother did not seem sufficiently remorseful for what he had done. After the physical wound was cared for, Erickson brought Roxana into his office and carefully explained to her that if Lance would lift her up onto his shoulders, she would find a secret off-on switch up on the ceiling. Roxana was instructed not to tell Lance what she was looking for, but that once she had it, she was free to install and operate it in whatever manner she chose. Roxana went to her brother, and he cheerfully complied with her request to be on his shoulders. And she found the imaginary switch without difficulty, but then could not decide whether it should be installed inside or outside her clothing. Not only did Roxana's toe stop bothering her, she also felt uplifted by her brother and was no longer as sore over the incident. Erickson, Klein, 1990. This illustrates the way in which highly individualized procedures defy replication in the form of a general technique. It is absolutely absurd to imagine using the piggyback technique with every patient who presents with an injured toe. However, when this case is viewed as a combination of 2 strategies, distraction and reorientation, it begins to make more sense. While looking for the imaginary switch, Roxana was distracted from her pain. Once she found this prized object, she was further distracted by the task of having to decide where to install it and how it should be operated. The fundamental reorientation was that she discovered new possibilities for gaining control over her pain and over her brother. She was no longer in a one-down position in relation to her brother. Furthermore, Lance was able to resolve his own feelings of guilt by doing his sister a favor. When this series of events is understood at this level, then the functional elements can be strategically replicated using unlimited number of variations. As with the first part of this book, each strategy will be introduced with a case report. Rather than have the case explained immediately afterward, the reader is encouraged to ponder the clinical narrative while reading the description of the fundamental principle and its general applications. The question to ask is, why did Erickson do it that way? The content in these chapters is not meant to be memorized as a sort of stale doctrine, but rather to serve as a spark for imagination and continued discovery. You really have this stuff within you if you're headed into social work or psychology, counseling, spiritual direction, whatever it is. It's a matter of being in tune with yourself. The beginning of wisdom is to understand oneself, and I'm finding that to be a lifelong process for myself. It's always more. and always more new things, new opportunities for old things to come up and out, feeling them as they come up and out and effectively dealing with them. And then that then not only makes space for new understandings and broader perspective, it also seems to reorganize who I am to a much lighter, freer place, however, to whatever degree, and in whatever area or areas were affected. So in other words, it doesn't affect my whole self. So I'm pointing again, bouncing off of Erickson's work to point back to you. If you're going into work with people, work with yourself continuously. And if you can find somebody who you can do personal therapy with for yourself, if they are sufficiently developed and refined so that they don't have to interject their human thoughts, they let you process yours, that could be helpful too. But you can do this on your own. It's strenuous, maybe more strenuous sometimes than others, but it's necessary, and it's the basis of your work if you're working with people. Maybe the basis of your work, whatever you do. It's very interesting to me. My fun throughout life has been interesting. It's the interesting things that are fun to me. Well, it's a little bit longer video. I'm going to stop here. Let me know if you have comments, questions. Trying to improve on the video quality a little bit as I can, and learning about this. Just want it to be effective in your life. Thank you for joining me.